All right, we'll go ahead and get started. A little after 12, we like to wait a little bit, usually a minute or two, because our colleague Russ is recording this. So afterwards, if you want a copy, which I'll start setting that out. Either way, it usually takes a couple of days for that recording to be processed, and then I start sharing that out. But it could be a good resource. We never know what we're going to talk about and where this goes, but given the topic, the ongoing conversations around the dinner table with colleagues, we thought it would be great to have that conversation about law enforcement in our community. So if you don't mind muting yourself, that would be helpful. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Greetings, friends, colleagues, alumni, and community partners. My name is Fred Fuentes. I'm one of your hosts, along with my colleague, Ms. Vanessa Armendariz. We welcome you this afternoon to Series 9 of LatinXLions. And LatinXLions is an effort created during the COVID-19 pandemic so that we could have conversations that affect diverse communities, specifically the Latino community, but we're not limiting ourselves to just the Latino community. Today's topic is Juntos Podemos, which we know translates to Together We Can. This is a Latinx informative and unity conversation. It's a direct message to our colleagues, our friends, our family, and our leadership. It's an opportunity for us to show empathy, respect, solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, our law enforcement officers, and our community activists. We encourage you to continue conversations with members of your community, law enforcement, clergy, or family if you feel triggered in any way. As stated in the title of this discussion, Juntos Podemos, Together We Can, we anticipate another great program this afternoon. So thank you for tuning in. Today's guests include professors, law enforcement officers, community activists, leaders, social justice activists, advocates. We have a diverse group of thoughtful professionals that have taken time from their day to share their perspective on today's topics. So what I'll do is I'll let our guests introduce themselves. We ask that when they do introduce themselves, that they share a little bit about themselves and why they were willing to accept today's invitation to speak on our panel. So I will open that up to our guests and mute myself.
Were we not going in any particular order, or are we just jumping in?
We are just jumping in.
I'll jump first.
Whoever speaks first, Dr. Edwards, you get to go first.
I get to go first. I might as well get mine out of the way. Hi, I'm Willie Edwards, and I've been at Commerce probably, I'll stop with 30 years. It's probably 29, maybe a little bit over 30. But anyway, I've been around a while. I thought it was a good opportunity because right now, a great deal of discussion going on between the citizens and police departments all around the country. And I think we've seen situations where it's probably really called for now. In the past, it's been kind of quiet, a few demonstrations, protests, but now it's kind of really actually spread it internationally. So it's time for us to talk, even at home, which would be Commerce. It's time for us to sit down, talk with our local officials, and get some sense of where we're going. What do we want to do? How can we, as you say, work together to get an understanding of the job of the police department, and also then of citizens? How can we help them do their job and at the same time be protected and have a discussion constantly going? So I jump for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Dr. Sharady?
Hi, I'm Amni Sharady. I'm an assistant professor here at Commerce. I've been here about 1.5 years now, and I'm also the master's coordinator for our criminology program. I decided to accept the invitation because I wanted to have an open-minded discussion and hear other perspectives, share what I'm able to share from my own experiences, especially with our, we have a lot of officers as our students, and I want to learn from the fellow panelists and also share what I'm able to share and just add to the discussion that's going on right now, because I think it's a very important part of making a change is having a good open-minded discussion with people amongst each other without censoring ourselves and worrying about things. And so it's good to discuss and learn from one another so that we can make a positive difference.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Banks?
I'm not muted, am I? I'm good. All right. My name is Armand Banks. I used to work at A&M Commerce about 2 years ago, and then I jumped back into the field of my expertise, which is barbering. I was excited about this when I was presented the opportunity, just because I know in the barbershop we have a lot of these settings, and I have a lot of clients who are actually law enforcement officers, and they give me insight as to things that they deal with on a daily basis. So when given the opportunity, I felt like it was a good platform to definitely express some of my thoughts and then some of their thoughts and bring it all together with people who I've met, some people who I have not met, but I know that we have in common the geographical location of Northeast Texas. So,
thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Assistant Chief?
Assistant Chief Howell Lowe. I've been with the department 21 years. Appreciate the invite to this. I'm hoping for some constructive dialogue today and maybe offer some insight as to our thoughts at Texas A&M Commerce Police Department.
Thank you, sir. And of course, last but not least, Chief Brian Vaughn.
Hello, Brian Vaughn. I'm the Chief of Police. I've been in law enforcement for about 25 years. I've been with the department a little over right at 23 years. Master Peace Officer. And my reasons for wanting to participate in this is, number one, Dr. Fuentes asked me to, and number two is I believe conversations like these are what we need to bring about change, which will eventually make it safer for all of us, the police and the citizens.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all, guests, for being here, visitors. I'll get started with the questions. Again, I opened it up on social media, doing my own research, working with our panelists. And so we have a set of questions here. The way we'll be doing it this afternoon is I'll start, and then I'll hand that hosting duties over to my colleague, Vanessa. But the first question I have is, how would you describe the relationship between North and Northeast Texas police forces and their local communities? And that's open to all of the panelists. So I'll say it again. How do you describe the relationship between North and Northeast Texas police forces and their local communities?
From a law enforcement perspective, this is an odd question, I guess, for law enforcement. I think probably because this question assumes that maybe across the board that all law enforcement communicates with each other. We all do the same things. Law enforcement is standardized across the spectrum, when in all actuality it's not. Each community that we serve has different wants, different needs, different norms based according to population, median age, sub-communities within the communities, et cetera, et cetera. And the police department's job, or a police department's job, is to basically adapt to the jurisdictional community to which it actually serves. So we do not know what Seattle PD does, or Chicago, and Dallas PD doesn't know what Orlando does, and doesn't know what St. Louis does, and Corpus Christi doesn't know what NYPD does. So with that, it's kind of hard to answer a type question on what does a North or Northeast Texas Police Department, how does the community feel about them? Because really we can only talk about ourselves because we have no control over those other departments. Yes, we all follow national laws and observe the national laws, but then you get down to a state level, and every state has different laws. So Texas doesn't do quite the same thing as Ohio or as Nevada. And then when you get inside to the state of Texas, yes, we have a standardized law enforcement or standardized laws that we take and we follow here, but every single police department has a different set of policies and a different set of procedures on how we actually do things. So what we can talk about, or what I can talk about, is kind of how we serve our community here. And I think part of the assumption, the basis of the assumption in the question, we get those questions all the time. What did Seattle do? What was Seattle thinking? What was Ferguson PD thinking? And our answer is always, I have no idea. I can't speak for them, and I don't know. I know what my feelings are over what I saw, but I'm not involved in investigation. We all don't operate off the same radio channel. I think it's funny with police officers, some of the stuff that we get, even friends that know I've been a police officer 20 years, or, well, hey, there's 4 cops that have a car pulled over in Rockwall. Do you have any idea what happened with that? No, I don't have any idea. So I talk about our community here, and for our community, we try to offer programs through the community, such as internships, National Night Out, ride-alongs, Ask a Cop, where we set up a table down at the student center, where people can come in and just come up and ask a police officer a question, and we can try to answer for them, and then put on programs for drug and alcohol abuse, sexual assault, things like that. And so with those communities, we adapt to our community that's here. But even this community here, a community within a community, we are very different even from the city of Commerce and what that community looks like.
I would jump in and say that as a citizen, because having traveled Interstate 30 for quite some time, and then I tell the students too that you've got to be aware of where you are. We are in Northeast Texas, and you've got to kind of understand the history somewhat of the community. And I would agree with the officer that probably each department is somewhat different, but there are probably, I would say, attitudes or mannerism or situations that most of our students, I would encourage, especially minority students, to take as they, if they ever get stopped. And I've had the opportunity of getting stopped on 30 because we also know that 30 is somewhat one of those highways where drugs are trafficked. So I think students have to be aware of the areas that they're in, and especially a number of our students probably come from around the area. So you've got to learn the attitude of the police department and probably some of the individual officers. So that becomes very important in terms of how you act when you stopped or you pulled over, or when you even have a question that you need to ask an officer or go to their department.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
I know for me, at least being from St. Louis and then moving here to Texas, I guess you can call it the preconceived notion from my family was that this is the South, and you need to conduct yourself in a manner to always make it back home within the South whenever you're interacting with a police officer. And that put a sense of fear, but then it also put a sense of caution in my mentality. But when I came down here, I can't say that everything was what I was told prior to. My interaction with law enforcement down here, even given the history of Texas and their relationship with police officers in their communities, I haven't seen anything that would warrant me to want to dislike or distrust law enforcement. Granted, I'm not saying that those instances don't happen. Me personally, I can't say that. But after me speaking with students when I used to work at A&M Commerce, and me speaking with a lot of the clients who've grown up here for a long time, I've known and I've grown to believe as myself to not put myself in a lot of trouble. So with that, I can't say that I'm not, profiled or anything like that. But I do know that there are a lot of instances that happen that warrant distrust, that warrant caution, even when there isn't a necessity to be cautious. And And I'm inquisitive to learn about why that is as a new resident, still fairly new resident of Texas. So.
Thank you.
I can agree to, so I moved from the Detroit area here, and with Detroit police, you don't really have many interactions. It's kind of hard to get them to come to anything. But I lived right at the border in a suburb, and the Dearborn police are very active, very involved in the community. They show up to the protests, they help, they protect the protesters typically, and so it's usually a very good environment. And then I moved to Richardson to attend school, and Richardson police, I will say, with my limited interactions, have for the most part been good, but I've had some interactions again where people have said, or where Dr. Edwards said that it depends on the individual officers sometimes. So, you know, most of my interactions in Richardson have been great. Once in a while you get somebody who's not so great. But I do like that during this time I have gone outside, you know, and just driving around, you see people seem to feel safer here because it's a diverse area. And so you see Black people, you see white people, you see Latinos, you see Middle Easterners and Asians walking around not really aware of their surroundings, happily ignorant. And so for me, from a criminological perspective, that's a good feeling to see that, where people just happen to feel safe in their area. But I will say when I leave Richardson and that little bubble, it does feel a little bit more like what Mr. Banks said, with the surrounding areas being a little bit more different. Like Dr. Edwards was saying, it depends on the city you're in. And so when I get to Carrollton, or sometimes even parts of Plano, it's a little bit of a different experience. And I know for our students, it does depend on where they live and on their race. I guest lectured in one of my colleagues' classes, and we talked about this and about how they feel about officers and their experiences with police. And some of the white students said, you know, I got pulled over with weed and nobody, you know, the officer just told me not to do that and let me go. And then one of the African-American students said, you know, I got pulled over for basically nothing and they searched me and it was very scary and off-putting. And then more stories came out like that, where you saw a stark difference between, you know, you saw that racial divide of the fear. And so that's something that I think we need to work on in the area. But I think that's true of most cities and most areas, as you have good, you have bad, and you have variety depending on where you are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that when you look at larger communities, less diverse communities, you may have some issues. And closer to home here in the Northeast Texas region, I think I can speak on my perspective, on my behalf. I've had a great working relationship with law enforcement, but I also am aware that when I travel to other parts of East Texas, that engagement changes. So we're aware, and also worth mentioning that for when you start talking to people, for African American men in particular, that could turn into a very dangerous situation in some places, in how you respond to that. Very scary, of course. Definitely appreciate everyone's perspective on that. I have another question. So what do you think are some of the biggest threats in your community, and how can social justice activists and police forces work together to solve those concerns?
I'll start off with that one. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Edwards.
No, go ahead, sir.
I think that
Okay.
I think that misinformation, misleading information is probably one of the biggest threats. I'll give the example here recent, the Atlanta shooting. I felt like there was a lot of misleading information put out. And like Assistant Chief Lowe said earlier, we don't deal with Georgia laws. We know Texas laws. But from a, if you will, go with me on this, from a Texas perspective, just letting Mr. Brooks go at that point was not an option. It would not be an option here in Texas. What happened following that, I'm not talking about, but I'm talking about prior to the shooting when they went to make the arrest. Here in Texas, a DWI first offense is like a Class B misdemeanor, just one step up above a speeding ticket. But you can't just we don't allow here in Texas you to let an intoxicated person go and not once you know they're intoxicated, we just can't do that. And then after that, you start looking at, here in Texas again, you start looking at felony type charges and what transpired after that. And so it was not an option just to let him go if the laws are similar to what they are here in Texas. And getting back to the misinformation and misleading information, for a lot of people, perception is reality. And so if you're receiving misleading or misinformation, your perception, you don't have the full view of what's going on. I do believe if you give people all of the information and you're transparent, and then you let people decide. But giving small amounts of information or inaccurate information causes a lot of problems to me. And to answer the second part of your question, I think the answer is true community policing. And the way I define true community policing is the police working together with social activists. Us, whether it's us coming to one of your events or you coming to a ride along with us and seeing both sides of the story, I guess, is the way I think we can work together. And again, I think this will give both parties a better understanding of what we're both going through.
I agree with the chief. I think especially looking at commerce, looking at the campus, and then branching out maybe that in terms of our students and social activists, that there's a need for more talking. I know during some of the years there have been forums that have been held where we've had officers to come to different student events to discuss different topics, and I think that's an exciting thing. In fact, as I talk to myself here, I think we need to move into the city itself to do that too. And that may be something I think some organizations will have to work on this coming fall and into the spring semester. There has to be more conversation, and so that we can situations from each side's perspective. I'm sure the students, I'm sure citizens have their view, and I'm sure officers have their view. And I think we need to spend more time talking about that. I think that will help somewhat to begin to smooth out our interaction, because we can't ignore the fact that our interaction has not been good. I mean, and I'm not saying specifically for commerce, but when you look at law enforcement and citizens, it has always seemed to be one of those us against them, or we or they. And I think this whole interaction now cannot continue like this. We've got to do some changes. We've got to make some changes, and we have to start listening to each other. So I agree with the chief in a sense there. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Atlanta because I have some different thoughts about that too.
I know, if I can chime in, I know for me, to the question, what are some of the dangers? I think that with me being a new father, and I'm starting to notice that people receive information from, the type of person that a person receives information from is the person that they receive love from. And I think that there needs to be some type of empathy on both parts to connect those two parts to be able to communicate effectively. Moving forward, at least from the activism side, we need to learn how to potentially appreciate and love our officers and understand that, hey, look, not everybody is what we see from the standpoint of from our video screens. And then from the policing side, not necessarily just giving out information, but more so getting to know the person, getting to know the people who you do patrol and police in the neighborhoods, even if that person has a past, even if that person has a criminal record, even if you know that person is what sometimes people call delinquents or anything like that. I think if you show some empathy to their situation, they will be a little bit more receptive to the information that you try to give them regarding better ways that can help their life, or better ways that it can help your job as to making it less interactions with that person and people of that candor. So I forgot the last part of the question. If somebody can.
So what were the biggest threats, and how can social activists and police forces work together to solve these concerns?
Okay, so I think I probably answered both of those.
So building off of that, I agree with my colleagues and my fellow panelists with what Mr. Banks was saying. Sort of, you catch more flies with honey, I guess, and that's sort of on both ends. But building off what Officer Lowe said earlier, I think it's not just a matter of getting activists and police officers to work with each other. It's a matter of perhaps having a conversation between departments. I think that while we know that officers, what happens here is not something that's discussed in amongst police departments in other places. Each department has their own individual awareness. Part of the issue is that that's a problem, where when you have one officer who has issues in one city and has problems and is a known issue in their department, and then they get fired, or they are asked to leave, or something happens, and then they go to another department and they get a job there, and then the cycle continues. So I think it's a matter of officers discussing with their communities and having that community policing conversation, but also making sure that we have a way for departments to discuss with each other for the sake of, building a better culture overall, with the community and with each other, and increasing that level of trust.
Thank you. I have one last question, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague. The question is, we hear pretty often that not officers are bad. What can good officers do to change the culture of policing that seems to be emerging in videos across the media? So what can good officers do? What's your opinion on that? And that's open. That question is open to everyone.
I'm going to jump in there first because I need to get this said, because I read that question yesterday and I thought it is good, because, we know, all of us, especially those of us who have taught and those who are police officers, we know there are a number of books out there that talks about what? The blue line. It talks about the subculture that exists in the police department. And it'd be the same thing in any profession. We have got to have officers beginning to respond when they see things going on that they know that are not right. When they know a colleague is not doing right. When they know a colleague has history. And it'd be the same thing in my department. If I know one of my colleagues is not teaching right, doing what we think is right, what we know we're evaluated on, then that person needs to be turned in. So I'm really hoping that as the national and local decision makers go, that will be one of the things that is actually put into some kind of written kind of document that says, when you know your colleague has needs to be told. We're going to have to put a dent into that blue line that you're my brother and I can't write on you. That can no longer exist. There should have, and I'm going to stop shortly. There should not have been a reason for those 3 trainers in Minneapolis, where I went to school, to wait and watch that officer with his knee on that individual. I thought about it as an individual. As a citizen, I could have gone and pushed the police officer knee off the individual. Of course, I would have gotten arrested. I probably would have gotten shot. But one of them, there was no reason for them not to do. Trainee or not, there's a decency, and that's what the citizens are not concerned about. There's a decency that is not being practiced by some officers. No, not all officers are bad. Thank God we've got some good ones, but there are some bad ones, just like there may be some bad professors. So somehow we've got to make sure that stops.
I know there in the entrepreneurial world, there's a quote, and it says, your level of income dictates your level of truth that you're willing to speak. And a lot of times, a lot of officers, I'm assuming that they're afraid to attack that blue line. They're afraid to go against the system. They're afraid to buck the system. And I get it. You got a family and you got kids to take care of. But unfortunately, I think in that instance, I don't know if there is a law that is required for a citizen to stop and intervene into something that is happening with another citizen. And if you witness it and you didn't do nothing about it, then you're just as accountable in that regard. I don't know if there's a law or anything like that, but I think that there should be some type of code of conduct with policing to require an officer who sees an injustice going on from another officer to intervene. It's going to take a lot of real strong individuals to be able to go against something that has been a standard for so long, but in order to impute change, you have to change yourself. So, yeah.
Can I intervene for just a moment to ask Amon to ask a question related to Amon's question there? Is there any type of law, and I guess Brian and other officers could answer this, that would, that would cause a person to say, okay, morally, I can't act. I know that I might lose my job, but if there was some type of law that said that there are repercussions when you observe something like that and you don't respond. Do we have anything like that, or is it just slipped up to my morality?
Dr. Miller, police officers are held at the same standard as citizens. There is the police code of ethics that all police officers here in the state of Texas, again, I can't speak for other states, have to abide by. So yes, there is already things in place for that. And I would be more than willing to share our code of ethics. But I kind of want to talk about this question, and it's hard for me to answer this question and not sound a little bit defensive for it. So you guys bear with me. But I've worked with officers and departments all over the state. And so where it says not all officers are bad, I'm going to tell you that most officers are good. Most officers want to come to work and do their job and go home and spend time with their families just like everybody else. But then again, we are humans. We are imperfect. I think what society is looking for is perfection, and we won't ever, as a profession, achieve that. Police officers are going to make mistakes. My officers are going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. But I don't believe that I don't believe that there is a culture of bad in police work at this time. And as an administrator, I'll be honest with you, it is 10 times harder to get rid of a bad officer than it is to hire a good one. You have officers apply. When we open up positions here at our department, we have maybe 5, 10 people apply for different positions and things like that. And it's hard to weed out, and we have psychological exams that every employee at our department goes through. And so there's many steps to hire a police officer, but it sometimes takes years. We've been through it. Sometimes it takes years to get rid of a officer who does not need to be in the department. It's like you have to follow the progressive discipline steps for your department. You have to go by the procedures that you have set in place that are meant to benefit everybody. It's not like an officer does one thing, you have to retrain, you have to give a warning, you have to do a whole lot of things before you can terminate a position of an officer. And sometimes, or many times, there are long periods of time in between a mistake that the officer makes or something that the officer does to the next time the officer does something. And so it's not like they mess up today, you can come in tomorrow and say, let them go. They have their due process too, I guess is what I'm saying. So
yeah, for sure.
But to get back to the real question, I don't think there is a culture of bad in police work. Like Dr. Edwards said, in any profession, there are some people that just don't need to be in the profession. And I think those are very few. And they are definitely the minority, let's say that.
Yeah, can I jump in just a super quick question out of you said that the policies are what make it difficult to get rid of an officer who really needs to be gotten rid of, and somebody else said we of course don't have a database that tracks these. Can't that change? I mean, if going off of if these decisions are made locally, would it be possible to change the policies so that it is easier to get rid of police officers who are causing the community and harm? Thinking in terms of most anywhere else, if you screw up, you will get fired. So, I mean, like tomorrow. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't answer that question. There is a database already. Whenever prior to us hiring a new officer, our governing body for police officers in the state of Texas is TCOL. And so we are required prior to hiring an officer to check with each department that officer has worked with to see to do a background on the officer. So that already exists. I'm sorry I didn't answer that earlier.
Yeah.
Can I ask
Sorry,
a question?
I'm going to go ahead.
Can I ask a question or with related to what the chief was talking about? My issue, this is Elvira White Lewis. I teach police officers, as my colleagues do as well, and done it for years. My issue, or what I always tell students that I'm training, that I'm educating, is the police department, law enforcement is unlike any other profession. It is the sole profession where that man or woman can use their discretion to take away someone's life or their freedom in an instant. So therefore, when we ask for greater accountability, I don't think we're asking for that much. As Dr. Edwards talked about, and the chief talked about, mistakes can be made. But when we make mistakes in our teaching, that's not taking someone's life or taking their freedom in an instant. So I just believe that there should be, rightfully so, greater accountability on this profession. And I'm not anti-police, was married to a police officer, been teaching them for years. So, but that's what I believe.
I have a question to piggyback off of Dr. If you don't mind, Dr. Fuentes.
Yes, sir.
To piggyback off of Mr. Vaughn, is police departments state funded, I'm assuming, and they are, if you have an department, the police officers are employees of said state, right, that they work in, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong or right on that? Jurisdiction?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, if it's in Texas, it's Texas, right?
Well, there are Texas law rules that they have to satisfy. But for instance, Commerce and the university, which to me would be the university has this sets of rules, right?
Okay. And employment in Texas is a at-will employment state, right? Meaning if there needs to be a firing, they don't have to give you a reason why they're firing you.
Well, no, again, I think, as the chief said, look, there are rules and standards and procedures, really actually in any profession, even in teaching. You've got to kind of document over time what our colleague has been doing in order to give a reason for them to be fired. And I think the same thing with the police department too, is that, and I think Atlanta, I was going to go back to, I don't know, Dr. Carter's question. I think Atlanta actually did. They kind of fired, if I remember the mayor talking, they fired all of the department, all of the officers, and then they came back to rehire them. And what they did is they had to deal with what? The police union of that area that changed some of the ideals and some of the requirements. See, that's one of the problems, is that when you've got the union that has worked with that city in order to set certain standards and certain requirements, if you let the union develop certain ideals that make it difficult to fire someone, then that's that city's fault. So I think that's the case in many instances, is that there is such a very firm kind of requirements that, let's say, the employer has to go through in order to get rid of, especially a police officer, then that it makes it very difficult and it takes a long process.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay.
But to further answer your question, Mr. Banks, No, the state does not employ. I am employed by the state because I work for A&M Commerce. But like Dr. Edwards said, a city, for example, the City of Commerce, they employ their officers. We're all governed by TCOL, if you are a licensed peace officer in the state of Texas. But different counties, different cities, railroad companies, they actually employ officers. Mail system, things like that.
Thank you, guys. Or do you want to say something?
Sorry, just with the original question, just to comment on the what can be done, because we do have a lot of good officers. We have some nurses, we've had issues, and so there are professions, every profession has its problems, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But when we get to officers specifically and what can be done to help the community, it's a matter of those good officers and seeking that may not be doing what needs to be done. And while it might be difficult to fire them, with the video of George Floyd, we had at least 3 other people standing there defending the bad action. And so all we need is one person to say, you know what, he's subdued. Let's just finish this arrest and move forward. This man doesn't need to die. He can't breathe. And so it's a matter of just having those potentially good officers stand up against the one bad person in that profession. And that's what would break the cycle and break the culture labeled as policing culture. If that's not the case and that's not truly the culture, it would be good to have those people standing up.
Thank you, guys, for this dialogue. Again, this is tough. These are tough conversations, and you're right. There are instances around the country where very emotional feelings are triggered. I'm really thankful that we have professionals here to talk about what that looks like in North and Northeast Texas. 100%. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Vanessa. She has some questions, and we may go a couple minutes late if you guys are okay with that. And we may be going back and forth on this question. It's a relevant one. All of them are, but we get that communities, and we talk about this often. Communities want to be heard. They want to feel respected. They want to feel engaged. And that's true for law enforcement, for the activists, for people living in those communities, for our college students that travel throughout the United States, our international students, everyone, of course, when they engage, wants to feel respected. And I think some of the greater points have been that in all professions, we have individuals that may not love their job and may not be as excited about their job, and in turn provide a product that's not very impressive. My engagement with professionals, me personally, it's tough when you see someone, when you have to go against the grain. You really have to stand up, and you have to anticipate that you may be treated differently when you do stand up. This is a reality of American culture throughout all workforces. With that, I'm going to pass this on to my colleague, Vanessa. She has a couple of questions as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Fuentes, and thank you everybody for being here. I actually do have a few questions and I want to open it up to all of you, but I have a question on the chat. It says, there has been a lot of discussion of policy changes in relation to law enforcement from the perspective of the panelists. How might policy address the issue?
I think from a law enforcement standpoint, they need to have some type of policy that is a see something, say something policy. It needs to be included in that policy and written down. That does a couple of things. It sets a standard right up front for the officers that you're bringing in, that you're hiring, stating that it's not going to be, your silence is not going to be accepted. And I think it tells the community that that the police department is not going to accept silence from its servants that are out running around. So that's going to be the first thing you could do. Go ahead, Dr. Edwards, you got something to say?
And I think this is going to go back to Dr. Carter's question too, is that I think what has to happen is that, yes, people in professional have to be able to hold certain standards for themselves and for their colleagues. And I know somehow tied into my answer would be is, I think for police departments, especially police officers, one of the things about if you rat on, if you tell on a colleague, it may not be as bad as us teaching, a colleague may not like you, but in police work, officers can be slow answering when you need help. Officers may not necessarily want to work with you. You also are in a position where maybe, and not on our campus, we're talking about large police departments in cities, where you may be in trouble needing response, an officer down, and you don't get that help. So I think that you got to kind of keep in mind for police officers. Teaching is not as bad. Our colleague may not speak to us, something of that nature. They may vote against us on some kind of committee, but it's not a life or death situation. So I think that's one of the reasons maybe that culture is going to be very hard to break, but we've got to. And I think the citizens now across the country are at that point where they're saying, look, you've got to do something about getting rid of the bad officers. No, not all officers are bad, but the fact is that those who have caught enough attention of the citizen, and something is going to have to be done.
The key is to have the department up front say that we're not going to tolerate that. And then the next step is to take and go in and get the bad officers out, the officers who are not going to say anything. You've got to make it easier for departments to get those officers out. And then the third thing you've got to do is you don't introduce cancer into your body. Okay, the first thing you do with cancer when you have it is you try to cut it out. So you don't bring that cancer in. You've got to have some type of controls over. We know what this person has done in other areas. They are what is deemed, at least around here, to be what's called a gypsy cop, meaning a police officer travels from place to place, from location to location because they can't stay hired anywhere. You've got to have the support to take and keep those people from getting in to begin with. So the only way to change things, or a way, if not the most important way to change things, is to change from the inside. So police departments are going to have to take that, write it down, accept it, make it policy, which makes it then easier to get out the bad apples. And once the bad apples are out, you don't put bad apples back into that bunch.
And there may also be some other steps or items that we have to do, and I'm saying we as citizens and police departments, to determine who are the best hires, who are the best people to hire for this kind of job. Now, of course, on our campus, our police officers are a little bit different because they're not necessarily dealing with, let's say, a variation of clientele. Even though we get students who are from major cities, they don't have the level of activities going on, illegal activities that would exist in a city like Dallas. But, and I think probably campus police, you've got to want to work with students. You know, you're not going to be working with hoodlums and hopefully whatever else we want to call them. So we've got to work, and I think that's going to happen with research, especially with people like us doing research to find out what other steps do we need to take in order to be able to identify whether this person will be a good officer or not.
Yeah, I think that speaks to things like temperament, and also speaks to some of those soft skills that we sometimes overlook. More time spent looking at the emotional makeup of this person, for lack of a better word, has. How quickly does this person get angry? You know, some of those, and I know those are hard to address variables, but in the cases that I've seen, it seems to be those people, those police officers who just, for whatever reason, they have a short fuse, and sometimes it just causes bad situations. So I would like for us to begin all over, not only for university security police officers, but also I'm thinking of SROs on our K through 12 campuses, where, as Willie said, they really should have, I know they're police officers first, but they also are educators. They're educating kids who are at a particular point developmentally, and they need to know something about human development and the fact that brain development of K through 12 kids or even college kids are at a certain place, and therefore you deal with them in a certain kind of way. So I am in my local community really emphasizing SROs having more emphasis on that education component. Know that they are, when they're in the education environment, educational institution, campus, then they need to think about their education role. They are an educator as well as a police officer.
Dr. Miller, I agree with you 100%. Again, speaking for our campus here, we are very, very particular about the type of officer that we hire. We actually go above and beyond to check. Psychologicals are not required for every employee of our department. It's only after 180-day break in service that a psychological is required. But anytime that you come to work here, we send you back through the psychological, and we have avoided some major hurdles by doing that. It costs a little bit, but in my opinion, it has been worth it. So I agree with you on that.
And you know what else, Brian? I think another thing too is, after officers have been around a while, we need to not just check them when they're coming in, but we need to do this period, because guys, officers change like anybody working in a certain position over time. You change in terms of your personality and who you were at the beginning, from where you were at the beginning. So I don't know how that could be working, a periodic check as to where you are. I know, you know, you want the very best, and we are human beings, and we are impacted by all kinds of life-related issues. And some of those issues sometimes impact how we perform on our job and how we relate to the impact that we have on people connected to our jobs and our positions. So that emotional, psychological component need not be overlooked at any point, whether at the beginning or later on in one's career.
I think it starts with education. And I agree with what all of you have said, but I think it starts with technology. Who not good people. It's a matter of making sure that we all work together to do our best in training people, in speaking up in the classroom or at the academy when they're saying something. And also, we have, I lost my train of thought, sorry. When we have people changing throughout their time in their profession, that happens with professors, that happens with doctors, that happens with everybody. And we know that officers typically see a lot in their career, and that affects who you are as a person, that affects your psyche. But I think the way to handle that is to have repeated bias trainings, have repeated, trainings, have repeated community outreach, have repeated situations where those officers are sat down and allowed to talk and reevaluated throughout their careers for the sake of the community, but also for the sake of the officers, because we know officer suicide rates are sometimes high. And so it's a matter of taking care of it on both ends so that we can move forward and make a positive change.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. And it's something that we've heard a lot of people say on TV. What are your thoughts on defunding the police forces around the U.S.?
They do not need to be defunded. I think that was, I'm going to suggest that that's probably a way to get some real good attention. There may be some consideration given to where money is going, I guess, to the police departments in terms of what they're doing. I think you've got citizens now who are very concerned about the police departments becoming very militarized, things that really look like they ought to be with an army and not necessarily with police departments. So I think that's going to get attention. I don't think we can do away with police departments. I do think that there's some work that could be done to help them out, shape them up, or whatever we want to call it. I don't think we can get rid of law enforcement. I think that's a very necessary social institution.
I don't believe that defunding is a necessity. I think that maybe reallocation of funds can take place. I don't think you need to defund it. I think we probably need to move some money into certain areas that could better help hiring. Like Officer Vaughn said, he said, the psychological portion of hiring an officer is expensive, but it's something that is probably a necessity. I don't know how much officers make. I don't know how their pensions or anything is like that is set up. But I do think that infractions definitely should dictate how an officer's pension may be distributed later on, or necessarily how much they are paid. I know in my job, if I don't perform well, I don't get paid, or I don't make a certain amount of money, or I potentially can lose a client. And that is one of the things that is tough when you're on a salary job or a job that makes a certain amount of money. No matter if you do a good job or a bad job, you're still going to get paid. So I don't think defunding is the thing. I think that reallocating some funds, a lot of funds, can definitely do more good than defunding can.
I don't think defunding is the right word, and I know we've been seeing it a lot in the media, but the meaning of defund the police, when you read up on what people are saying, is not necessarily to get rid of police departments, it's to reallocate how the money is being spent. And I don't agree with completely defunding police, but I do agree that seeing how different departments are operating. Some might be operating great and some might have issues. And so I think being critical of how our funds and our taxpayer dollars are spent, regardless whether it's police, military, schools, any of these public social institutions, we have to reassess where the money is needed and where the problems are and what to do. And so I think looking at all of these institutions, including police officers, is important. It's important to see how our money is allocated and what it's going towards. And I think the police are part of that. So I don't know that defunding is the right word, but perhaps putting more money towards certain police programs, putting part of the money in certain departments that may have an overfunding. And I'm not saying that that's across the board, but there might be cities somewhere where they have too much going towards policing that they don't need put there, but they might have a homeless problem, or they might have a, school issue. So I think reallocating those resources is important, but it's going to depend on the jurisdiction. It's going to depend on a lot of factors. And I think it's important that we as a community are critical and look at that, and that we have a policy eventually that sort of figures out where to put that money and how to allocate it so that we're functioning at the highest level in all of our social institutions.
For us, as an administrator, when you start talking about defunding or reallocating funds and things like that, as administrator, the first thing that I do is I start looking at where that money can come from. And for me, it would start with probably reducing programs that we provide. It would go to reducing services that we provide, and then staff. And so I think when you start talking about defunding and reallocating and things like that, it kind of contradicts what we're trying to do in the first place. We work on a lean budget anyway. You're starting to talking about taking away the training aspect of what we do. That would be another area that I would have to cut, which is totally contradicts what society and the citizens are calling for with police anyway. So I think it would be a mistake to defund or reallocate. Over time, police work, not just in our city, I'm talking broad now, or in our community, police work, we've been tasked with doing things that police were not really intended to do. And take mental health, for instance. We have become the first responders to mental health calls and things like that. And as you said earlier, Dr. Cerati, that's not what we're intended for. That's not what we're trained to do. We do get some training in it, but we're not trained like someone that works in a clinic and things like that every day. I know larger cities are testing out programs where social workers or counselors travel with police officers to the different calls and stuff like that. Let's talk about Northeast Texas now. I don't have the manpower to put a counselor with an officer for 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day. We just don't do it. We just can't do it. I'm glad to see that Dallas is doing it, and they have been doing it, and it seems to be working well for them. But there's another whole aspect to that, which is not what this conversation is about. But defunding would be a mistake.
Okay, and here's the last question. How have new technologies such as videotaping affected how you and your officers do your job? And how do you think social media have affected how police officers are represented in the community?
I'd suggest thank God for social media to some extent. It has allowed us to, I think, as Chief Bond mentioned earlier, we do have to be careful about some of the misperception of what's being given us. But I think we're becoming very conscious now of acts that may have been done and in the past been able to be kept quiet. But now a great deal of this is out. I have to go to the white female in New York that called the police department on the black man And what she described would have probably gotten him beat up, shot or something, at least arrested. And when that was not the case, he was not threatening, he was not harassing her. So I think media has some positive, also some negative side, but thank God we do have it now. And I think all of us, police departments, I am certainly for them having videos, wearing the cameras, the microphones and all of that. That just allow us to see more of the activity, and it probably makes them a little bit conscious too. And I think one of the things would be is maybe looking at the rules that allow them to turn off or to turn on. But social media, we just have to learn how to use it in a positive manner.
Agreed. Cell phone cameras actually have been around for almost 20 years now. So most police officers are used to being recorded, photographed. Public's been photographing and recording us for years. It's nothing new to us, and it should be nothing unexpected to a law enforcement officer at this time of day. We were, and I'm proud to say, one of the first that had video cameras in vehicles here sometime around 2004, and then we quickly made the addition of body cams here somewhere around 2006 and 2008. And I think if you go in and talk to officers, you pull one to the side and ask them, most of those officers are going to tell you that they love the video cameras. They do several things. First of all, it cuts down on complaints. Second of all, it allows other angles to be viewed from for what's going on. Up close view for the body cam, maybe a further back, more panoramic view from the vehicle cameras. It helps us sustain as a department true complaints that come in. So they file a complaint. We can quickly go in and look it up on video to make sure that it is what it is. But it also helps us unfound false complaints, which we do get from time to time. Importantly, too, it acts as a teaching aid for officers. So they can go back, they can watch their videos. Supervisors can sit down with them, and it can be a teaching tool for the officers. Okay, so what could you have done better here? How was your communication? What kind of tactics did you use that could have been better? But more importantly, those cameras provide a contextual basis for why did the stop occur, what led up to that initial moment where the cell phone video starts. People don't walk around with cell phone videos up, well, normally, and just continuously take videos from it. So the videos that come out of the vehicles and the videos that come off the body cameras for officers provide some type of context. And unfortunately, the cell phone videos or clips or snips of seconds or minutes of video that end up on, Twitter, WorldStar, Snapchat, Facebook, whatever it may be, and they don't show any context to what happened. And everybody jumps on a social media outlet like Twitter, and they automatically obtain their law degrees, and things get blown out of proportion. So with video, it helps immensely. I don't see any downside at all, period, to video and to officers having video. I think every department in the country should have video. But we need to, as a public, we need to take a little bit of time there. This is a society that immediately wants satisfaction. And so we need to take a little bit of time there to allow the department to look at the video, to see what happened in that video, what led up to that instance, and then take a look at it and then give them time to release that video to the public and move on from there. Instead of, well, if it happened at 8 o'clock this morning, we expect a video of it and be able to see the entire thing from start to finish by 5 o'clock that afternoon. We just need a little bit of understanding on how things work. But video is definitely the way to go, for sure.
I think it's important to realize that this is not something new. Having media videos is, and one thing that's always fun is an undergrad process to nowadays, and to show the videos of the protesters and to show the videos of that situation and to see how these generations that didn't grow up with that react, and they don't realize that it's necessarily something that's happening that's repeating itself. They don't realize that this isn't necessarily new. The difference and what is new is that now, not only do we have the videos, we have the means to distribute those videos. And so it used to be, if I had a video on my cell phone, maybe I texted it to somebody and that was it in the early 2000s. But now you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have hashtags, you have things trending. And so something that used to be a small community video that maybe went around and made its rounds is now out there for everybody to see. And so that's one thing to think about. And the other thing that social media has done is, and this is part of my recent research, is you have these message boards online, and there's one called Reveal News, and there's one called the Plainview Project, and then where it really exposes what we were calling the bad apples earlier, because these are posts that show the racism and show the problematic viewpoints and show some of the negative aspects of certain officers and give them a place to talk to one another and to discuss amongst themselves. And so I think one of the good things about social media is it does expose things. And so last year you had an investigation in Pennsylvania, in I think Dallas might have been one of the cities, New York, because Reveal News and the Plainview Project exposed some of the Facebook posts and some of these situations. And so I think they're important, and social media has given us a tool to highlight the good things, but also to highlight the bad things and sort of start that process and start that conversation in exposing some of the negative things that are out there that people are putting out there publicly, because these outlets are not digging for private things. They're digging for, what's posted publicly and where do these people work and why are they posting this. And so I think these are good things that are worth looking at, but we have to remember that these aren't new situations. These are just more in-your-face situations than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I myself personally value the fact that we as citizens have more footage of police interactions. I'm not going to say I feel safer if something is videotaped, if I'm being dealt with a police officer. But to piggyback off of Mr. Lowe said, context. And we, the public, we don't know the context or the antecedent to certain situations or interactions with police officers. A lot of those situations that we're starting to see on a everyday basis is resulting in death. And I don't know what context that we need to see that warrants the result of death, especially in a lot of unarmed citizens who are being killed by police officers. Now, I know, like Mr. Vaughn said, to go back to what he said in regards to Atlanta, he said in Texas, letting Mr. Brooks leave in that situation wasn't an option. I mean, the question is it possible to let him live in that situation? That's what I want to know. Is it possible to let him live at least? And if so, then that's where, to tie it all in together, that's where the empathy comes in. That's where the reallocating of funds comes in. Maybe not so much as going into higher salaries or into higher matched pensions, but to more training. And I know that's not a sexy thing for officers to want to see from their police departments to say, come work for us. But it is something that is going to let officers know, like, hey, your department has your back based on training and just structure in regards to help you do your job the right way. So that's my spin on the cameras.
I think what you're saying is very important, and it goes back to just to build off that, what Officer Lowe said with, in a lot of videos, the videos and the ones that are really catching the public's attention and the community's, outreach and driving people mad are the ones like George Floyd and Eric Garner, and where you're seeing people where, regardless of the context before, when you have, somebody's knee on someone and the offender's already subdued, that's sort of where we need to start stepping up and addressing these situations. Because while there may be 100 videos where the context mattered, it's that one video where the context does not matter that make a difference in how the public views officers, and that can change how the public perspective is. Because when you see somebody being subdued, they're saying, "I can't breathe." And this is a repeated sort of video every few years that we see with different faces. That's where one of the issues is. And that's where we need to have a change, because it's not a new thing. And so Eric Garner and George Floyd, we have somebody with we don't have video of Breonna Taylor that I'm aware of, but somebody going into your house in plain clothes and killing you, Botham Jean. These are situations where the context doesn't really matter, because we do see that part where they're subdued and they're not resisting, and that's where we need to work on changing things.
I agree with you. In situations like that, those contexts ahead of time, but those are, I don't want to call them specialized situations, but those are certain situations that happened that, yes, we knew what the context was that led up to that, and then there was still no excuse for what happened after that. I'm more discussing the fact of the other videos that come in that are just those little short snippets that you really do need the context from, but it takes 3 or 4 or 5 days to get out anything for what really happened in that situation. And by that time, there's already a whole load of trouble that started behind it. So, I do see what you're saying, and I agree with you in the cases that you named in that context. What happened prior to that, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, so we've run out of time. And I would like to thank everybody for being here. And I kind of just wanted to have a summary of what we talked about. We talked about control over one's own department. Like Chief Brian said, we talked about how most officers are good officers and how it takes a long time to get rid of a bad cop due to the rules and regulations that we have in place. As well as Chief Kyle said, we need to have a culture, or the police need to have a culture, and when they see something, they say something. No tolerance to the bad officers, and make it easier for those officers who are bad to be removed from the police force. As well as the trust from citizens to the police, and how that's been pretty much gone for this year at least. We have so many protests around the world for George Floyd, and now recently for Vanessa Guillen. So I think it's going to be really hard to mend that trust and that bond that we had, or that the citizens had with the police. But it's been a difficult year for all of us. It has been strange. We put Chief Kyle and Chief Brian on the spot a lot today. And I just want to say that we've seen a lot of injustices happening, and we've had to speak out like we're doing today. On top of that, we've had to deal with the virus that's killed, millions of people around the world. And the title today was Together We Can, because as citizens and as police officers, if we work together, if we, like Chief Kyle said, if we change these rules, if we don't tolerate the bad cops, if we work with the police, if we help them figure out what's going on, I feel like we can make a difference. And I just wanted to remind you all that you are not alone, and please remember that the world supports this cause. And thank you for speaking today. And we've had a lot of interesting responses today, so it was a very, very good Zoom meeting. So thank you for being on here. Thank you for taking the time and responding to these questions. I know they were tough questions.
Thank you, guys, and please feel free to email any one of us if you have additional thoughts, suggestions, ideas, concerns. We're here to to continue this conversation. So please email us directly, and we will respond. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Hi, Malik.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brad, thank you, Vanessa. Great.
Thank you.